Hello, my name is Judah Axe, and I'll be presenting this session called Teaching Multiply Controlled Intraverbal Behavior. I am a professor at Simmons University in Boston, where I teach in our on-ground master's program in behavior analysis, our fully online master's program in behavior analysis, and our PhD program in behavior analysis. I love the National Autism Conference at Penn State, where I've been a few times. It is such an enriching and wonderful conference, and I'm sad to not be there with all of my friends and colleagues and meeting new people, but I'll be instead presenting virtually from my dining room in my house. I'm going to give a definition of the intraverbal and a little bit of background or some basics on the intraverbal before getting into multiply controlled intraverbal behavior. And so here's an example of an intraverbal. Person says, "What's an animal?" and another person says, "Bear," and there's a thumbs up, high five, way to go, some acknowledgement. And so according to Skinner in his book Verbal Behavior, 1957, an intraverbal is a verbal response, like bear in this case, evoked by a verbal stimulus, in this case, what's an animal, and reinforced by generalized social condition reinforcement, like this thumbs up. And there's no point-to-point correspondence between the antecedent stimulus and the response product. So what's an animal doesn't sound like bear, right? And if someone said, "What's an animal?" and the response was, "What's an animal?" that would have point-to-point correspondence. And we would call that anechoic, not an intraverbal. But because there's no point-to-point correspondence, this is an intraverbal. So I'm going to give an overview of the two topics that I'm going to talk about in this presentation, both having to do with multiple control in intraverbal behavior. And so the first one is asking a question. This all is in the context of working with children with autism, students with autism, and building their intraverbal repertoires and getting into more complex intraverbals. And so asking a student, "What's a green animal?" and the student says lizard. And that correct reinforced response has to come under the control of multiple stimuli. I'll show in a second. Another example, "What's a brown food?" and the child says potato. And so lizard has to come under the control of those two verbal stimuli, green and animal, right? Green apple is green, but apple wouldn't be a correct response. And then elephant is an animal, but that would not be reinforced. Only green and animal have to converge on a response like lizard or frog or something like that. And same with what's a brown food. Both brown and food have to exert stimulus control over the response. So that's the first topic I'm going to talk about, the conceptualization of that, research on that, and other writings on that type of repertoire. Second topic is going to be this situation where a teacher presents a picture, say of a horse, and asks, "What is it?" Child says horse. And then the teacher shows a picture of an apple and says, "What color?" And the child says red. So in this case, there's also multiple control, but now it's with the verbal stimulus, "What is it?" and the nonverbal stimulus, the picture of the horse, converge to control the response horse. And with color, both the antecedent word color and the picture, in this case of an apple, converge on the response red. And in this type of situation, you would also show the horse and ask what color, and the apple and say, "What is it?" And so students would have to come under the control of the verbal and nonverbal stimulus that converges on the correct response. This first, as by way of introduction, repertoire we've called a verbal conditional discrimination as well. So I'll go through that. So that's an overview. But before I get into those two topics, I'm going to go through the intraverbal subtest from the VB map as a way of just talking about the going from simple intraverbals to more complex intraverbals, and with the big idea that we should be programming intraverbals with all the students that we're working with. And so the early stages show some simple intraverbals, And then for the higher functioning, more verbal students, we'll be ready for the later stages of the Intraverbal subtest. And the Intraverbal subtest is available on avbpress.com, so you can find it there. And so what Mark Sundberg has done is created 8 groups of intraverbals, and again, starting out simple. And so group 1 is animal sounds and song fill-ins. So even a very early learner who's only got a few mans, a few tacks, and is just learning can do things like ready, set, and the child says go, or a dog says ruff, peek-a-boo. And so those are some of the earliest intraverbals we want to program with our students. And then a next set of associations, shoes and socks. You brush your teeth or hair. You ride a bike. And so I have a friend here and myself from a number of years ago to demonstrate each of these groups. And my friend here is very high functioning, child with autism, and he is about 5 years old in this video. And so let's see how he does. He often, I'll kind of give you a heads up, adds other content onto his answers.
All right.
Oh.
Hey.
Yeah?
Twinkle, twinkle, little
Star?
Yeah.
Just like a bionicle star.
The itsy bitsy.
Spider?
Mm-hmm.
A spider has 8 legs.
Happy birthday to
Yeah.
Nice
A
job.
popcorn word.
You're a smart guy. Let's see if you know these. You brush your
Teeth.
That's right.
Which are these? I always do that.
Yep. You sleep in a
Pajama.
Okay.
And in bed.
Or you sleep in a bed. That's right. You wash your
Hands.
Yeah. Very
So you
smart.
can stop germs.
You are a smart guy.
So that was some items from groups 1 and 2. He got those no problem. Moving on to group 3 is simple what questions. What can you drink? What can fly? What are some numbers? And then group 4, simple who, where, and age questions. Where do you wash your hands? Who builds a web? And so these are getting more complex now. There's different students have to start to come under control of the particular WH question, who or where, right? Who is your teacher versus where is your teacher? Those are not programmed in this subtest to ask both, but have to start attending to multiple verbal antecedents, whereas group 3 is all what. And so don't really have to attend to that. So let's see how my friend does with group 3.
What are some numbers?
1, 2.
That's right. What are some colors?
Red, one of my favorites.
Wow.
Blue and yellow. Those are the primary colors.
What do you read?
A book.
That's right. And what do you find in a kitchen?
Well, an oven
Mm-hmm.
and a counter,
Mm-hmm.
a sink.
Mm-hmm. Very smart. What can fly?
Let's see. Like birds and eagles and all the other birds and jets too.
That's right. You're so smart.
And group 4.
Others. Where do you wash your hands?
In the sink,
You're right. And who builds a web?
a spider.
Wow, you're smart. Who drives the car?
Parents.
Yeah.
Your parents.
What do you see on TV?
Different TV programs.
That's right. And why do you use a Band-Aid?
To stop blood from coming out.
That's right. You're so smart.
So he's got these no problem, can answer those what, who, where questions. You can see the latency is a little longer with these responses, where he has to think about the response more than he did with those fill-ins or associations. So group 5 is categories, functions, and features. What shape of wheels grows outside? What can sting you? And group 6, adjectives, prepositions, and adverbs. What do you eat with? What's up in the sky? What's above a house? And some of these get tricky. I actually stump my friend on a group 6 question. So let's see how he does.
What grows outside?
Plants.
Smart. How about this one? What shape are wheels?
Round.
Yep.
Just like a circle.
What do you do with a sock?
You wear it on your foot.
You're a smart guy.
First comes the sock, then the shoe.
That's right. What do you wear on your head?
A hat.
Yeah. What's something that's sharp?
A sword.
Okay. That's smart. That's good.
That's sharp.
Mm-hmm.
I liked how I don't think I was expecting him to say sword for sharp, but certainly right. Swords are sharp. Group 6.
What do you smell with?
Your nose.
What's under a boat?
I don't know. That's hard.
That's a hard one?
Yeah.
Okay. What are some hot things?
What do you want to work on now?
Lightning.
Mm-hmm.
The sun.
Mm-hmm.
Where are you going? Oh, you want to see what's going on? Oh, okay, Trevor, sit.
A barbecue stove that is on.
Mm-hmm.
Get your card out.
That's smart.
On your card. Juice card. Juice card.
What
No.
grows on your
Juice.
head?
Nothing.
Nothing grows on your head?
Hair.
Yeah. That's good.
So he got those. And here he's having to, in a lot of cases, pay attention to multiple verbal stimuli in the questions. That last one, what grows on your head versus what grows outside? Or what do you put on your head? What's something you put outside, you could ask. And so we'll see that come up as we look at the verbal conditional discriminations. So the final two groups, multiple part questions, where here the child does have to come under the control of multiple verbal stimuli in the question. Why do people wear glasses? Where do you put your dirty clothes? What do you put in a sandwich? Why do you wear a coat? Some why questions. Those are probably some of the hardest. Let's see how my friend does.
A few more. What makes you sad?
When something's kind of wrong, I think.
Okay.
So, where you get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Why do people wear glasses?
If people don't see very well, they have to wear glasses.
That's right. When do we set the table?
When it's before dinner.
That's right. What's something that you can't wear?
Let's see.
Good job.
Oh, that's a hard one.
That is kind of hard. Something that you can't wear.
Normally, these things, like those, and that. Your hair.
Your hair?
No,
That's pretty
Trevor.
good.
Here, no.
What's something that's sticky?
No.
Honey.
Yeah, honey is sticky. You're right.
And pollen.
And what? Pollen?
Pollen, yeah,
Yep.
pollen.
All right, so stumped him there with the can't, right? That's a really hard one for kids. You could almost say almost anything. What's something you can't wear? But that negation is really hard for even my friends here. And let's see the last group.
What's in a balloon?
Air.
Mm-hmm.
If you pop it, air will come out. And
Mm-hmm.
it goes all through the house, but just like a flying saucer.
You're right. What musical instrument has strings?
A guitar.
Yep.
That's
Any others?
a violin that includes a stick and a bass.
Mm-hmm. Why do you wear a coat?
So you don't get an allergy.
So you don't get an allergy.
Mhm.
Very good. Where do you go if you're sick?
The doctor or the hospital.
Very good. Let's just try a few more.
So he did quite well on those. He knows a lot of that stuff. It was hard for me to not laugh out loud on some of those responses. He's a smart guy, a creative guy. And so I show this intraverbal subtest for at least a couple reasons of we should all be incorporating this into our assessment and our teaching. So again, going from those early skills with our early learners to the medium type skills and then the higher level skills. And also as an introduction to looking at, which we'll look at in more depth, of which of those items require more simple intraverbal, simple discrimination. You can hear one word and answer, like shoes and socks, brush your hair, versus the multiple part questions. What do you find in a balloon? When do we set the table? And so the student has to come under the response has to come under the stimulus control of multiple words or multiple verbal stimuli. So the first topic I'm going to delve into is this verbal conditional discrimination, or two antecedent verbal stimuli evoke a verbal response. And we see this as one of the barriers in the VB map, in the barriers assessment, failure to make conditional discriminations. And so I'm going to go through what that means a little bit and give some examples. Mark Sundberg is credited for this conceptualization, and he published his conceptualization of this verbal conditional discrimination in this 2011 paper. I wrote and published this paper on conditional discrimination in the intraverbal and the analysis of verbal behavior, and I'm going to go through some features or some items in that paper. Icasith and Smith in 2013 in the analysis of verbal behavior published this paper that looks at the same phenomenon of two verbal stimuli evoking a verbal response, but has a little bit different conceptualization of it. And so if you'd like to read more about that, I point you toward this 2013 paper. And so getting into this is that we first back up to and look at what's the definition of a conditional discrimination. And the definition is when behavior comes under the control of one stimulus only when in the presence of another stimulus. So this is a basic phenomenon in learning and behavior analysis that's been thoroughly researched. And there are different types of conditional discriminations, usually evaluated in a matching to sample format. And so there are visual, and non-arbitrary conditional discriminations, such as if an organism or a person or a child sees a green circle and then sees a green circle and a red circle and is asked to match or has a history of reinforcement for matching, the person will select the one that looks like it. So it's one visual stimulus to another visual stimulus, and they're non-arbitrary. They have physical similarities to each other. An arbitrary conditional discrimination would be an auditory visual in this format, where if the teacher says, "Where's the shoe?" or "shoe," a child, when given a choice between a dog and a shoe, point to shoe and get reinforced. And so that's an auditory visual conditional discrimination, because saying shoe is auditory and the picture of the shoe is visual. And so these meet the definition of conditional discrimination because it's emitting a behavior in the presence of one stimulus only when in the presence of another stimulus. Pointing to shoe is reinforced when the person hears shoe. Pointing to dog is not reinforced when the person hears shoe. Pointing to dog is reinforced when the person hears dog. And so we can also think about auditory conditional discriminations. In the basic research, this is researched less frequently than the other two types. But we can think about auditory as this intraverbal phenomenon where we hear a verbal stimulus as auditory and we produce a verbal stimulus as auditory. And so we can break this down into what we might call simple intraverbals, which we engage in all the time when we do casual greetings like this. Hello, hi, what's up, nothing, how are you, fine. And so those are, you hear just kind of one verbal stimulus, hello, and you emit a verbal response, hi, no point-to-point correspondence, and coming under the control of just one verbal stimulus. Now we can think about this question. what time is lunch? And so with a child with autism, this might evoke the response sandwich. And so if that's the case, we can consider that only lunch is exerting control over the response. In other words, the child hears lunch and says sandwich, and we could call that a simple intraverbal. Only one verbal antecedent evokes one verbal response. Or what time is lunch? A child could say 6 o'clock. And here maybe only the word time is exerting control, and the child's coming under the control of time, so another simple intraverbal. But if the child says noon, likely coming under the control of time and lunch, and where we can think of lunch as the ST and the word time as a conditional stimulus. So noon is reinforced in the presence of lunch when it's also in the presence of time. However, sandwich would be reinforced in the presence of lunch when it's also in the presence of eat, or what do you eat for lunch? And so we can consider this a conditional discrimination because of that two-part antecedent situation. And Sundberg defined this, a conditional discrimination in the intraverbal, as one verbal stimulus alters the evocative effect of another verbal stimulus, and they collectively evoke an intraverbal response. And so this is what we're interested in with these multiply controlled intraverbals or verbal conditional discrimination. And so I'm going to go through some more examples of this. So we might look at these sets of questions, and a big idea here is that we want to think about when we're teaching students, when we're teaching simple intraverbals, and when we can get them to a more advanced repertoire of conditional discriminations, in verbal conditional discriminations. And so if we teach, say in a session, these 4 questions: what do you eat, what do you drink, what is red, what is yellow, that we call those simple because a child can just hear that last word and emit a different verbal response to get reinforced. But conditional discrimination is required when, if the teacher asks, what do you eat that's red, what do you drink that's red, what do you eat that's yellow, what do you drink that's yellow? And so now a child has to come under 2 verbal antecedents. And of course, conditional discriminations could be more than 2. And many of our complex questions, when any of us are having conversations, are many words that we have to pay attention to in order to answer the response. I like to say sometimes is, what's the name of a college in Boston that's an all-women's college and it's situated in the Fenway? Oh, Simmons University. And so you kind of have to respond to all those antecedent verbal stimuli. So here's my friend again. Let's see how he does with these questions related to eating and drinking.
All right, a few more. Ready? Tell me a food.
Well, food is like a cheeseburger. Cheeseburgers are kind of like hamburger, but they got cheese.
True. Very smart. And tell me a drink.
A drink is like water.
Yeah.
But sparkly water is different.
Yep.
It's sparkly with bubbles in it that are called sparkles.
This
Very
one stays
good.
down right there.
Tell me a yellow drink.
Yeah.
Let's see, what is a yellow drink?
Okay. Ready?
Like orange juice?
That's very smart. That is yellow drink. Tell me a brown drink.
1 point is
Root
good.
beer.
You're a smart guy.
Root beer is one.
Hands down.
Tell me a brown food.
Steak.
Steak is brown food. You're right. And tell me
Have a look.
a yellow food.
Look. Point to the star.
Spaghetti.
Spaghetti's yellow food.
Yeah.
You are so smart.
So he's got those. He can emit those verbal conditional discriminations, come under the control of one verbal stimulus in the first few questions, and then multiple verbal stimuli, or 2, in those last few questions. Took him a little while to think, and yeah, maybe it helped him think of steak by licking his lips a little bit. You may hear my dog in the background also, just as a warning. So we can, one other way to think of this repertoire is related to multiple control of verbal behavior, nicely outlined and described in this paper by Michael Palmer and Sundberg, 2011, in the analysis of verbal behavior. And so, and this really comes from Skinner, 1957, but two types of multiple control are outlined here, where divergent control is where we hear one word, like dog, and that evokes multiple verbal responses. So I hear dog, I heard my dog a little bit ago, but if I hear someone say the word dog, I might say, oh, a dog can be a pet, it barks, it has a collar, and so that word evokes many verbal responses. Whereas convergent control is multiple verbal antecedents converge and evoke a smaller set of verbal responses that'll be reinforced. And so, kind of like my Simmons example, tell me a dog that has short legs and a long body. Oh, a dachshund. Got it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about research in both of these areas, but mostly going to focus on convergent control. And this is just another way to think of that repertoire. Tell me a food that's brown. Is food and brown be those two verbal antecedents that converge on the response steak, for example? So in the 2008 paper, I looked at prior research on intraverbals and examined the extent to which they targeted conditional discriminations in intraverbal versus simple discriminations. And so a lot of those studies were teaching children or students to answer questions. And there's often, in most cases, there was a one-to-one correspondence between a controlling verbal stimulus and a verbal response, so limited requirements to make conditional discriminations. In other words, student could hear one word and evoke or emit the reinforced verbal response. So for some examples, Sundberg et al. 1990 was a study teaching intraverbals to individuals with developmental disabilities and hearing impairments. And so these questions in this study were really long and had many, many words. So, and let's see, this first one is, what do you use to connect three-pronged plug into a two-pronged socket? Do you know? Well, that's an adapter. And what do you use to clean the bottom of a deep jar? Bottle brush. And what do you put food in to keep it fresh? Plastic bag. And what do you use to pour oil into your car so you won't spill? And that would be, of course, a funnel. And I always like the car examples in Sundberg papers, given that he was from and working and going to school in Michigan. And so, again, these are long, complex sentences. What do you use to connect a three-pronged plug into a two-pronged socket? That's, a lot of words in there, a lot of things to discriminate. However, if these are the only 4 questions that are taught to a student over and over again within multiple sessions, and these 4 questions are targeted each session, there's maybe a pre-assessment, baseline, teaching sessions, and post-assessment, and it's only these 4 questions, a student can start to respond adapter only when he hears the word socket, and can respond bottle brush when he hears jar, and respond plastic bag when he hears fresh, or any of the other single words. I think often it's the last word we hear might have the most control. So in other words, the researcher could have said blah 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 socket adapter, right? And so it's I don't have to attend to those other words because I'm only asked one question about anything to do with a socket. And so there we don't see the requirement to emit a conditional discrimination. Finkel and Williams, 2001, study on teaching children with autism, common intraverbal type questions. What's your name? How old are you? When's your birthday? What do you like to eat? Where do you live? What's your telephone number? And so if we scan through these, they're mostly varying. They have different types of questions, different words in each one: birthday, eat, live, number, address. There's a little bit of evidence of requiring conditional discrimination. What's your name? What's your mother's name? So now I can't just hear name and emit the correct response. Mothers will change the evocative function of name, and if there's no mothers, then name has a different function. And how old are you and how are you? And many of us working with children with autism know that these are often hard for kids to get to discriminate. And we'll talk about a few methods for teaching those. Vidora et al., another intraverbal study with individuals with autism, lots of questions, and they compared textual prompts and echoic prompts. And what do you do with a stove? What do you do with a book? What do you do with a phone? And so these have relatively a lot, 6 or so words in each question, but they all have that form of what do you do with? And so if that's what a student is exposed to, in a similar way, none of that is going to exert control over the response if this is all that we teach within a session, which is a lot of questions. And these are great repertoires, but we want to analyze them as simple intraverbals. And so again, child could hear stove, say cook, book, read, phone, talk, vacuum, clean. And so no apparent requirements to emit conditional discriminations there. And so, as I mentioned before, a whole set of studies are on teaching categories. And here we have divergent control, where one verbal stimulus evokes multiple verbal responses. And so an example, tell me some musical instruments. And we want a child to say drums, guitar, piano. And tell me some animals, zebra, lion, chicken. So here, we want those multiple verbal responses, but by and large, and in the studies that I reviewed, there was you only had to come under the control of one verbal antecedent, such as instruments or animals, to emit correct responses, so limited requirements to make conditional discriminations. One study back in 1983 arranged questions and stimuli in a way that required conditional discriminations in the intraverbal. And these researchers asked students, these weren't full questions, but they said school things, home things, school people, home people. And so school things, pencils, notebooks, home things, bed, couch, school people, teacher, nurse, home people, mom, dad. And so here, couldn't just hear the word things and emit the correct response, had to also come under the control of school and home, and similar, can't just hear people, but school and home, and do home and do school. So that was one example, and there wasn't another study for quite a while that had this requirement to make conditional discriminations in the intraverbal relation. So I'm going to give some more examples here, and these are a little bit longer questions than before, but we can see these are simple intraverbals because can just come under control of that last word. For example, what do you do at recess? What do you like to do on the weekends? What are your favorite games? What are your favorite TV shows? We could turn those type of questions into requiring conditional discriminations with, for example, what do you like to do at recess? Who do you play with at recess? What is your favorite game? What is your least favorite game? And so let's see how those questions do with my student here.
What do you like to do at recess?
Play Space Rocks Castle.
Okay. And who do you play with at recess?
Well,
Good job, Trevor.
my friends Tommy, Charlie, and Matthew.
Trevor,
Yeah. And Sanko.
Very good.
So no problem there. He can emit conditional discriminations in the intraverbal. Here's some more examples. Conditional discriminations, and we've seen these come up in some more recent studies. What do you write with? What do you eat with? What do you write on? What do you eat on? What do you eat that's red? What do you play with that's red? What do you eat that's round? What do you throw that's round? So that, important point here is if you're going to program a session with requiring conditional discriminations, there's got to always be the ending word has to appear at least twice, once with one word and once with another word, so that and then right, for example, is right with and right on. So eat with and eat on. So have to attend to both of those words in that set of 4 questions. And then we have eat again here, but eat that's red, play with that's red, and so all those variations. If there was only one question about red, then it wouldn't require conditional discrimination. What is a brown animal? What is a green animal? What is a brown food? What is a green food? What is a red food? What is a red drink? What is a yellow drink? And let's see how we do here.
Hey, Will, what do you write with?
Good job, Trevor.
A pencil,
That's right. And what do you eat with?
a fork, and a spoon, or a knife.
Very
It's a
good.
good thing.
And hey, what do you write on?
Good job.
Paper.
And what do you eat on?
Put your hand there,
A
bud.
plate
You're so smart.
with a policeman.
Yep. Let's try just a few more. What do you eat that's red?
Red peppers.
Good. And what do you play with that's red?
A red ball.
Very good. What do you eat that's round?
A cheeseburger and a hamburger.
Good. And
They're
what
round.
what do you play with that's round?
A ball.
Good.
It's just like a basketball.
Good.
So again, he's got those. He can do those conditional discriminations. One more list.
And what's a brown animal?
A horse. Sometimes it's different colors.
That's true. And what's a green animal?
A snake.
Yeah,
Sometimes snakes have black spots.
that's true. And what's a green food?
A green food is broccoli.
Yeah. And what's a brown?
celery.
What's a brown food?
Do you need help?
That's hard.
Do you need help?
I can't even answer it.
A brown food?
No. Well, plants need soil. That's a
Trevor.
soil for the plant. That's a food for the plants.
Soil?
Yeah.
All right. That's
help?
good. All right. We're done with that. Hey, actually,
So tricked him up a little bit there. One interesting thing to notice there is that'll come up later in this presentation is that what's a food that's green? And he answered, a food that's green is broccoli. And we'll see that's part of the intervention or the strategy that we use to teach other types of intraverbals that we'll see later on is repeating that or echoing part of the question or the key parts of the question. All right, so when students are not as adept as my friend there, they might make those errors. And so, or might not be able to omit those conditional discriminations. Might, what's a food that's brown? Apple. And what's a food that's red? Ball. And so they're only coming under the control, kind of like that. What time is lunch? Sandwich. Only one of those antecedent verbal stimulants. So this has been studied as a phenomenon called overselectivity or restricted stimulus control. Overselectivity in the sense that when I hear what's a food that's brown, I over-select or over-attend to only one of those antecedent stimuli and not both of the antecedent stimuli. And so this has been studied for decades now, and most recently Dubey and colleagues, failure to respond to multiple stimuli in a stimulus complex. Going way back to 1978, some treatments that we know about these things is we can emphasize, and I actually caught myself doing that in at least one of those videos, is the problem of how are you and how old are you is kind of there also. We emphasize that how are you, how old are you, how are you, right? And that makes the verbal stimuli more salient. Or prolongation, I kind of did there also. How are you? How old are you? And one other procedure that these researchers had, which I would never use because it's kind of strange, is saying the word twice. How old are you? How are you? Or something like that. I would go with more the emphasis and prolongation. One other kind of treatment for this problem is called the differential observing response. And so this has been studied in basic conditional discrimination research in a variety of ways. And the main idea is that a student attends to each of the or all of the antecedent verbal stimuli. And so one example, Dubey and McIlvaine, in the matched sample, say when we saw that green circle and a green and red circle, and we have to match, it actually a little bit more complex of, say, seeing the word dog and then having an array of different animals and matching the word dog to the picture of the dog. Identity matching first as a differential observing response would be first matching the printed word dog to the same printed word dog out of an array of printed words, and then matching the picture of the dog to an array of other animals and dog to dog, identity matching, and doing identity matching with the cow and the horse or whatever the distractor or S- stimuli there are. And so that ensures that I'm responding with respect to each of the stimuli in the environment and the antecedent condition in the array. And then I'm less likely to exhibit that over-selectivity or restricted stimulus control. And so this has been shown in a number of studies to work. And so some of the ideas that I had come up with in the 2008 paper, I'm going to share here, and some of them have been examined a little bit in the literature. And maybe the prerequisite or a way to teach one repertoire to get that conditional discrimination in the intraverbal repertoire, such as tell me a green animal, would be selection intact, I call it. So there's an array of things that are green. There's an array of pictures, and some of them are green. And so the experimenter would say, what is green? And the child selects and tacks. So out of a whole bunch of animals or objects, what is green? That bike is green, the lizard is green, and the ball is green. Bike, lizard, ball, selecting and tacting. Which one of these are animals? Oh, out of those, lizard. Out of the things that are green. What's a green animal? A frog or a lizard, whatever the example is. And so some of that responding with respect to the pictures could generate responding intraverbally. And that's often the case, and we'll see that in at least one study. Maybe echoic could be a way to get that differential observing response or attending to each of the antecedent verbal stimuli. So when I point, I want you to repeat the last word I say. What is a brown? Child says brown. Animal, child says animal. What is a brown animal? Bear. And so by echoing each word, I know the child has attended to each word and is not only attending to one of the words. Maybe this could be done. I think this might be a harder one, but maybe an intraverbal to the components. So what is tall? Well, trees are tall, buildings are tall. What are some animals? Bears are animals, lions are animals, bears, lions. What is a tall animal? A giraffe. So I'm responding intraverbally with respect to the components, and then when they come together, I'm emitting a response that's a conditional discrimination. I show here two recent reviews in verbal behavior and intraverbal, D'Souza, Akers, and Fisher, 2017, in the analysis of verbal behavior, a wonderful comprehensive review of studies using Skinner's analysis of verbal behavior with children with autism, and Stotch et al., 2017, on intraverbal training for individuals with autism, in particular multiple control. And I recommend both these articles, and both of them indicate that there's limited research on these repertoires of multiply controlled verbal behavior and intraverbal behavior in particular, and verbal conditional discriminations. So overall, limited research, but I'm going to share some research examples and what we can learn from that. So Kaisamore, Karsten, and Mann in 2016 in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis published a study that built on this concept of verbal conditional discriminations. And so they had 7 children with autism, ages 4 to 18, and the problem that they addressed was that when they said, what's an animal that's red, the children would say parrot. What's a vehicle that's red? Parrot, right? And so that's that indication of over-selectivity or restricted stimulus control, only attending to the red, and not, certainly not to the word vehicle in that case. And so some of the other questions also, what's a fruit that's green? What's a vegetable that's green? What's a fruit that's orange? What's a vegetable that's orange? So this is similar to the lists that I've shown. And so they did a test asking those questions. Tell me, what's an animal that's red? What's a vegetable that's green? And so on. And they evaluated a number of teaching conditions. And so one teaching condition was prompt delay and error correction. If a child was correct with the interverbal, praise and the token. If incorrect, repeat the question, what's the animal that's red? Quote prompt, say parrot, parrot, good. And they did that and evaluated how well that worked. And it worked in some cases, as I'll show in a minute. And another condition that they did was differential observing response. And this is similar to what I described before, where what's the animal that's red? Say animal red. Child says animal red, echoes that. Ask again, what's an animal that's red? And same consequences, prey is edible, or the error correction. And so here, that differential observing response is having them echo those 2 keywords to ensure they're attending to both of those words, which would limit that over-selectivity or restricted stimulus control. Another intervention teaching strategy that they evaluated, which has been evaluated previously in conditional discrimination research and some studies on interverbals, is called the block trials procedure. And so this is an example of what that looks like. And this is used when students have that restricted stimulus control and have a difficulty discriminating, say, between question 1 and question 2, like what's an animal that's red, what's a vehicle that's red. And so here's a 10 trial session, and there's these different steps of the block trials procedure. And so it might look like this, where in step 1, all 10 trials are the same question. What's an animal that's red? You ask that kind of mass trial training. And then sessions where all the trials are the second question. What's a vehicle that's red? And they would do that. And then it's kind of doing half and half, where half the session is trials, 5 trials with question 1, 5 trials with question 2, and then reducing the size of the trial blocks. And so 4 questions, 4 trials with question 1, 4 with question 2, and then 2 with each. And so this gradually increases the requirement to discriminate between the 2 questions. And it's kind of a most of these prompting type format. I see it. It gets harder and harder as the trial blocks are smaller, because there's more time switching between the 2 questions. And so Kaisamore et al. Evaluated DOR, so echoing, and the block trials. And the steps were kind of like I just showed, 20 trials. They had 20 trials in a session for each question. When that was correct, there were 5 successive trials for each question, 20 total. So 5 question 1, 5 question 2, 5 question 1, 5 question 2. And then when there were errors only in the first trial, because that first trial is the key one, right? Because the student has to switch. So what's a animal that's red? Parrot. What's an animal that's red? Parrot. What's an animal that's red? Parrot. What's an animal that's red? Parrot. And now after 5, switching what's a vehicle that's red, a lot of times you'll get parrot until there's error correction. And then what's a vehicle that's red? Fire truck. What's a vehicle that's red? Fire truck. What's a vehicle that's red? Fire truck. And then switching back to what's an animal that's red? Fire truck. Some researchers, Laura Groh specifically, has called that, and this was based on Lovaas, a win-stay pattern of responding. That, hey, parrot got reinforced on the last bunch of trials. I'm gonna stick with that, and say it even when the question or the antecedent verbal stimuli are different. And so the goal is to have students come under the control of those antecedent verbal stimuli and not under some sort of restricted stimulus control. 4 successive trials, when 100% accuracy, 2 successive trials for each question, kind of as I showed. Another condition was a modified DOR condition, and this was similar to the one I had written about in my paper. What's a fruit? Fruit. That's green. Child echoes green. What are you supposed to say? Fruit, green, kiwi. And so that's how they did that condition, to ensure, again, that observing response to each of the 2 keywords that needs to exert stimulus control. One participant had progressive prompt delay, starting with 0-second delay, error list to 4 or 5-second delay. And the last condition was a modified prompt delay with error correction that had a partial vocal prompt. So ka to prompt coffee, for example, ki to prompt kiwi. And so show some of the graphs here. And Jim and John, for example, these 2 participants in multiple baselines across sets, that progressive delay and error correction, prompt delay and error correction was enough to get mastery with both of these participants. And there's the rest are post-tests. And so they just needed that first level of teaching. And same with Paul here. And what the researchers found is that all participants mastered at least one set with that prompt delay and error correction, with a simple, praise token if you're correct, and ask again with an echoic prompt, and praise if incorrect. Jim, John, and Paul mastered all the sets with that procedure, whereas Jeb, Craig, and Ryan, and Dan needed some of those other procedures. And so we look at Jeb and Craig here, and in this case, these are the sets for those participants where they only needed the prompt delay and error correction. But now we look at Dan on the top here, and so he did not meet the mastery with prompt delay and error correction. So the researchers went on to the DOR, having him echo, what's the fruit that's green? Fruit green. And that resulted in his correct intraverbal responses. And same with Ryan down below. And Ryan, a note here that errors were consistent with restricted stimulus control, such as naming a white item or a food, but not naming an item that is both white and a food. So he was showing that pattern of simple intraverbal coming under the control of only one of the 2 antecedent verbal stimuli that needed to exert stimulus control. The DOR fixed that in a way, had him attend to both. What's a white food? Say white food, marshmallow is the one I'm thinking of. Here's Craig, and so Craig, prompt delay and error correction did not work. DOR did not get mastery. DOR and block trials, right? So doing that block trial procedure, a whole lot of training and sessions on that, and changing the size of the trial blocks. The modified DOR resulted in his mastery of the of the skills. So he needed the block trials and that modified DOR, which tell me a fruit that's green, green. Tell me a fruit that's green, kiwi. Or what do you say? Fruit, green, kiwi. And so he needed all of those procedures, and some of our learners certainly will need many procedures broken down to this level. And this study really shows the individualization of procedures for different participants who will need added training to do this pretty difficult repertoire of conditional discrimination in the intraverbal. Jeb here, prompt delay and error correction did not work, DOR, modified DOR, partial prompt delay, progressive prompt delay, and the modified prompt delay and error correction. This works now. And an error analysis, which some of these data show, is that Jeb would say the same response each time. So what's a animal that's red? Parrot. What's a vehicle that's red? Parrot. What's a fruit that's green? Parrot. And so there was a lack of stimulus control, and doing that with the partial vocal model to get him over that hump of, oh, I need to respond differently for the different questions, was effective in getting him to answer correctly and discriminate amongst the questions. So overall, Ryan and Craig showed that restricted stimulus control, what's a fruit that's green? Cucumber. What's a vegetable that's orange? Peach. That's only coming under the control of the color in that case, but not fruit or vegetable. Having that restricted stimulus control, the DOR, differential observing response, of repeating fruit green, for example, facilitated correct responding. So that's really powerful, that having a child repeat that or echo those key words can improve responding. And so that's something I encourage you trying when working with students who have a difficulty with this, which a lot of students will have a difficulty with this, is have them echo the two keywords to ensure they're attending to those two keywords. Dan had many instances of no response, and the DOR enhanced the stimulus control and increased correct responding. Jeb had many completely incorrect responses, and so that modified prompt delay with the partial echoic increased and helped him. With 4 participants who were taught the DOR to echo, there was more echoing the relevant parts of the question. And so this would be, tell me a fruit that's green, and even outside of the training conditions in the post-test, they say fruit, green, kiwi. And so we can think of this as a problem-solving strategy, that I'm going to be, or I say a child develops a history of reinforcement for correct responses that were more likely when the child echoed the keywords from the question. And a little evidence of this, that 2 of the participants moved their lips a little bit, right? What's a fruit that's green? And that might indicate some covert echoing or a covert differential observing response. Really hard to get our hands around experimentally, but a lot of us know that when we have to solve these problems, we engage in these kind of things, right? Tell me a college in Boston and the Fenway. We whisper it to ourselves maybe, and then that generates the correct response. This is back to similarly with my friend in the videos, that when I said, tell me a vegetable that's green, oh, a vegetable that's green is broccoli, right? He kind of did that incidentally because it's an effective procedure for generating correct responses. And again, that you see in Ray about 6 different procedures used in this study, from the differential observing response, the modified with echoing 1 word at a time, to the block trials procedure, and the prompt delay. And so the importance of knowing all those procedures and then individualizing with different students based on their error patterns and needs. Share a couple other studies, more recent ones, that have targeted this repertoire of conditional discrimination in the intraverbal. And D'Souza, Fisher, and Rodriguez in 2019. in the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis also examined this repertoire, and they were particularly interested in the Sundberg and Sundberg 2011 paper and study that suggested certain prerequisite skills for verbal conditional discriminations. And so they targeted in their study questions like, or antecedent verbal stimuli, like a mammal from the savannah is a fill in the blank. That's kind of hard, right? And so here's the answer, zebra. And so they targeted mammal from the savannah, mammal from the rainforest, bird from the savannah, bird from the rainforest, a utensil for scooping, a utensil for cutting, a tool for scooping, a tool for cutting. So you see all those different arrangements. And they tested that after doing these, kind of sequentially, after doing these different types of prerequisite skills, like multiple tack training. So you see a zebra and you say, it's a mammal and it goes in the savannah. And so they directly train that, and it looked at if teaching that, the multiple tack training, did that produce that intraverbal? Well, a mammal from the savannah is. And again, the zebra was present, or a picture of it, in multiple tack training, but not present in the intraverbal probe. Multiple listener responding would be putting out an array of pictures and point to the mammals, point to the one from the savannah. And so they did that multiple listener training to get the responding to those different components, and tested to see if that would generate the intraverbal responses. They did direct teaching on intraverbal categorization. So tell me some mammals, tell me some things from the savannah. And that's kind of along the lines in my paper of getting those intraverbals of the components and then putting them together for the more complex intraverbals. And listener compound discrimination, LCD, an array of the different items, and point to the mammal from the savannah. So there, as we'll see, this was a key one, because that is almost the same as a mammal from the savannah is a point to the mammal from the savannah. There you have the same two verbal stimuli in the antecedent in the same way. It's just with listener, there's pictures that you point to, and with intraverbal, no pictures, and you have to say zebra, for example. And so here's the general results that they got. The those different procedures, the multiple tack training, multiple listener training, something's covering up this one, I can't see it. The next level of training, the intraverbal categorization, and all of those with a post-test for the intraverbals did not produce the correct intraverbal responses, but that LCD, that listener compound discrimination, did then produce correct intraverbals, as we see with those dots there. And the gray bars are DORs, in other words, echoing. And they saw that this happened in some cases, but not in others, and wasn't really correlated with correct responses. But again, that doesn't rule out that the children echoed covertly. And so they might have used that strategy covertly. But by and large, they found that kind of all those prerequisites were needed. And if you look at that again, a key theme we'll see, a key theme in these couple recent studies is that we should teach responding, tacting, listener responding with pictures or with visual stimuli before we target intraverbals. So prompting, this type of intraverbal categorization or intraverbal prompting was not sufficient, but listener responding with those compound was. And so we, by and large, a big takeaway from this is that students should have experience and a history of reinforcement with responding to these antecedent verbal stimuli with pictures, and then we can transfer that to intraverbal responses. And so we see a similar thing in this final study, similar finding in this final study I'll mention, Devine, Carr, Pyatt, and Peter's daughter from 2016. And they worked with typically developing children because they wanted to examine this kind of more basic phenomenon. And show that tacting or experience with visual stimuli is necessary and critical for responding intraverbally. And so if I were to ask you, who is red and has a star, what might you say? You know, that nothing's coming. Who is blue and has a sun? Yeah, not sure about that either. But they asked those after showing these visual stimuli of these kind of people with a star or a sun, and they were in different colors, which you can't see on this, but the darker one is blue and the lighter one is red, and they gave them these fake names. This is Qui, and this is Unk, and this is Zut and Ram. And so after tacting these, this is Unk. It's got a blue sun, and this is Zut, or this is Qui, and he's got a yellow, red star. Multiple tacting of those. Then after that experience, I can answer who is red and has a star, Qui, who is blue and has a sun, Unk, right? And they actually tested in different arrangements. Like, tell me about Qui. Oh, he's red and has a star. And so the big takeaway is the histories with nonverbal stimuli, right? The pictures are crucial to establishing complex intraverbal repertoires. And so there's another underscoring of the importance of before we teach, tell me a food that's green, tell me a food that's brown. We shouldn't do that in the absence of the pictures, of being able to respond as a listener to those, as tacting those pictures of tacting steak and spaghetti and banana and apple and so forth, orange juice, as we heard about in the videos. And so we should give students experience tacting and behaving as a listener to all those stimuli before we target them as intraverbals, as tell me a animal that's green, for example. That's what these data are telling us. I like to give some practice questions at the end of this segment of the presentation that you can do on your own. And so the question is, does this set of questions require conditional discriminations? What do you eat that's red? What do you drink that's red? What do you eat that's yellow? What do you drink that's yellow? So it's kind of a yes or no on does it require conditional discriminations or not. What about this set? What do you eat that's red? What do you eat that's green? What about this set? What do you eat? What do you drink? What is red? What is yellow? And what do you write with? What do you eat with? What do you write on? What do you eat on? So for each of those sets of questions, I like to ask, is there a requirement for conditional discriminations? And if we were in person, I might have you talk with a neighbor and write out some examples of some more creative questions you could ask that require conditional discriminations. And important to remember this kind of formula that whatever word is on the end, that's got to appear twice, and what other key word comes before it, that has to appear twice. And so following that rule will allow you to come up with questions and teaching sessions that require conditional discriminations. So my conclusions for topic 1 are although some students early learners need to learn those simple interverbals, the fill-ins, the associations, we should be moving beyond those simple interverbals to more complex by programming interverbals that require conditional discrimination to having 2 or more antecedent verbal stimuli that have to exert stimulus control. We saw differential observing response has been effective in ensuring attending to each critical antecedent verbal stimulus. And I think if I'll add one from those last 2 recent studies, is we should ensure experience with visual stimuli and responding to questions about visual stimuli before targeting, responding to questions intraverbally. DORs can help overcome the restricted stimulus control. I am now going to talk about the second topic that I was going to talk about in this presentation, which is the effects of incorporating co-op responding into intraverbal TAC training. I'd like to acknowledge Olga Maleshkovich, my doctoral student at Simmons, and our colleague Francesca Deglia Espinoza. And this paper has been recently accepted to JAVA, and so that should be coming out soon, hopefully. I want to also acknowledge colleagues at Behavioral Connections in Bridgewater and New Bedford, Massachusetts, a wonderful school for children with autism run by Melanie McCarthy Pepin and Jason Pepin, and Taylor Murphy conducted the sessions for this study that I'm going to share. And so this was the diagram I showed at the beginning, where now we're talking about the question, what is it, with a picture. And so the question and the picture have to converge to evoke the correct or reinforced response, in this case, horse. And what color and the picture converge to evoke the response here, which is red. And there's a few ways we could call this repertoire, but the one I like the most is calling it an intraverbal tact, which we took as a term from Bondi, Frost, and Tincani, 2004, because it's part intraverbal, because one has to discriminate the verbal antecedent stimulus, and part tact, because the speaker has to discriminate the visual component or the nonverbal stimulus. So part intraverbal, part tact, I think nicely called an intraverbal tact. And we see this problem. This was a problem that haunted me early on in my teaching with children with autism using a verbal behavior approach. And we would often get responses like this when working with children with autism, early learners especially. We'd show that picture and say, what is it? Child would say cat. We'd say, what does it say? Child would say cat. And what color is it? Cat. And so we can think about this in that the child is attending more to the picture than to the questions. There's more stronger nonverbal stimulus control, weaker verbal stimulus control, and we can call this a delay in question discrimination. So this child in this example correctly discriminated the picture, but did not discriminate the question. And this is a case, as we talked about before, of over-selectivity or restricted stimulus control, over selecting the picture antecedent stimulus and not attending to the question in the antecedent stimulus. So a problem, and so we want to identify ways to fix this problem, but the wonderful, amazing, brilliant Francesca Deglia Espinoza, I saw maybe for the first time at the 2014 National Autism Conference at Penn State, present how she has addressed this repertoire, and I was blown away by this. And so I'm going to share a study that she and her colleagues did, and then a study that we collaborated on. And so everything in this I learned from Francesca, and seeing her present workshops and videos on this procedure just made me want to conduct research on it so that the procedure could get out to more and more people. And so that's what we're hoping for. And so here's some background on this also, is that here again, what is it? Is that before I saw Francesca, and what I think a lot of people do, is they will prompt fade, use prompting, fading, and reinforcement to prompt horse, right? What is it? Say horse, good. And maybe time delay or most to least prompting or something like that. And quick transfer, And what color? Oh, say red. Good, you do it. What color? Red. Good, nice job. Touch your nose. Do this. What color? Red. And so, we have effective ways of teaching in applied behavior analysis to generate these responses. But what Francesca did was taught the students, when they were presented with what is it and the picture of the horse, to say it's a horse. And when they were asked what color, the picture of the apple, they'd say color red. And so this seemed to work beautifully with her students, and it made a whole lot of sense because it ensured the student was attending to and discriminating the question, what is it? It's a horse. And in a way, it also prompts the correct response, that it's a has to go with an object and color has to go with a color. And so I was fascinated by this again. And so Francesca recently, 2020, in the European Journal of Behavior Analysis, published a study on this, teaching multiply controlled tacting to children with autism. And so her procedure was the following: was first training echoics of the frames. So we can call those frames also. What is it? It's a horse. We can call a frame because it's a, then you plug in whatever picture you see, and color, red, for example. You say color and then plug in whatever color you see. So in that sense, it's a frame, similar to what Skinner described as autoclitic frames. And so Francesca and colleagues used colored numbers. And so they would ask what number, and would want to get 6, and what color, and would want to get red. And of course, this was hard for the students with autism she was working with at first. They might answer with the number every time, independent of the question. And we'll see some of those patterns in a little bit. And so then after training the echoic, the echoic training was meant to strengthen the intraverbal control between the word color and a color, and the word number and a number. So echoics, right? No visual stimuli at first. So it's just say color blue, say number 3, say color green, say number 2. And many, many trials of that to shape up and strengthen those intraverbals within those autoclitic frames, so that when I said color, I would say a color. When I said number, I would say a number. The second part was training intraverbal tact components within mass trial training. So showing different colors like this. So these are just colors, not colored numbers. And teaching, pointing to this and say, what color? And prompt fading, color blue. What color? Say color yellow. Good. What color? Say color green. Good. What color? Say color red. Good. And then doing the same thing with the numbers. What number? Number 2. You say it, right? Prompting, prompt fading, reinforcement. What number? Say number 3. And so they directly did many teaching sessions on those components, and then put them together, and didn't exactly do as much prompting and prompt fading, but used differential reinforcement. And so would show this and say, what number? Number 2, and show this, what color? Color blue, and so forth. And then they tested a generalization set with combinations that hadn't been trained before in this condition. So now they're seeing for the first time a red 1 and answering questions about what number, what color, blue 4, and so forth. And this was effective in generating the acquisition and generalization of this repertoire of seeing a numbered color and correctly answering questions, what number and what color within a session. And so in our study, we had 3 preschoolers with autism, ages 4 to 5, and they could tact all of the components So we targeted colors, numbers, objects in the form of pictures on cards, and shapes in the form of pictures on cards. They had to demonstrate 2-word echoic responses because that was required, and they had to respond poorly during intraverbal tact pre-assessments. So they couldn't do correctly answering the questions about the different objects. And we conducted this in a quiet room in the participant's school. And so we had 2 categories of stimuli, and in one it showed a shape like square and a number like 3. And so we targeted numbers 1 to 6 and circle, triangle, square, oval, star, and diamond. And so we kind of mapped this out in a matrix format, just parentheses, this is not matrix training, but we mapped this out so that we trained, it's got elements of matrix training, say, but we trained these along the diagonal. So we directly trained 1 inside a circle and a 2 inside a triangle and a 3 inside a square. Where this varies from matrix training is that there's this other dimension of needing to respond correctly to this under the question of both what shape and what number. And same with these. And then we probe these little g's, which were different combinations of the trained components. And then again, before the study, the participants could tact oval, star, and diamond and 4, 5, 6, but we hadn't done training with the combinations of those, and we tested these ones. So showing an oval and a 4, and so on, and just did testing for the generalization of this. Could they now answer what shape and what number with oval, star, and diamond and 4, 5, 6 in combination? And the PA refers to pre-assessment. So we did pre-assessments on these combinations, like a 4 inside a circle, and went through a session of what shape and what number. So here's another depiction of this category 1. These were the training items, 1, 2, 3, circle, triangle, square, and then the 2 generalization sets. This was the other category. So now we have pictures of different colors and asking what is it and what color. This was set up in a similar matrix, same logic here, same arrangement and format. And so 3 combinations along the diagonal: brown cup, yellow cat, and green flower. And then showing those in the varied combinations. And then these other 3 objects and other 3 colors in combination. So ultimately showing this purple spoon and answering what is it, spoon, and what color, purple. And in each session, those questions usually were not back to back, right? A session would be, what is it, spoon, what color, blue, what is it, car, what is it, hat, what color, purple. It's hard to do. And so we would do that. So this is what a data sheet looked like. So again, the 12 sessions in each trial, and this was randomized, quasi-randomized, so that we didn't do a whole bunch in a row, but what shape, what number, what shape, what shape, what number, what number, and then randomizing the visual stimuli, 1 in the circle, 2 in the triangle, and they could be correct, incorrect, need a prompt, or no response. We also had 3 additional generalization probes that we called cross-category stimuli. So whereas they had learned to discriminate color and object, now they have to discriminate color and number as well as shape. And so showing this, for example, and asking what number, what shape, what color, and this one the same, and a similar testing format. And so we looked at their ability to discriminate along those dimensions, as well as these more 2-dimensional cross-category probes, so color and shape, and number and color. So this was like the Francesca study, but this we only targeted in these cross-category probes. We didn't do direct teaching on those types of stimuli. The dependent variable was the skill we were going for. Again, was the percentage of correct of answering the questions. So for an example there, what color with the yellow cat? And a correct response would be yellow. And whereas we taught them to answer this with color yellow, they didn't have to say color yellow in the probe, in the test, to be correct, right? That's not required when we're working with kids, is that you have to say color yellow. But they had to say it in the training, but they didn't have to say it on the test or in the probe. But they could if they wanted to. And we had a series of baseline and post-training. We continually probed the train set, the 2 generalization sets, 12 trials per probe session, and the
You got it.
What? So here is an example of baseline.
You got it. What shape?
Free.
Touch your nose. Touch your nose. Oh my goodness, you found it. Here we go. What shape?
Number 2.
High five. What number?
3.
Show me this one. There you go, kiddo. What number?
1.
High five. There you go. Nice high five. What shape?
3.
Touch your shoulders. There's your shoulders. Good, Sam.
So you can notice that this participant, this child, said the number on the card, no matter if the teacher said what number or what shape. He always said the number. And so we'll see that in baseline, the students were often around 50% correct, because they would always, in a sense, over-select or attend to only one of the visual stimuli and tacked it, no matter what question the teacher asked. So the training, again, with the echoic, we use progressive time delay from 0 to 5 seconds. And I'll show a video of this, but immediately prompted, showed, for example, the 1 in the circle, what number, and prompted the child to say number 1, and so forth with what number, what shape, what is it, and what color.
Here we go. What number? Number 3. Number 3.
Number 3.
Number 3. There you go. What shape? Shape triangle.
Shape triangle.
Shape triangle. Good, Sammy.
So just by the way, too, this is a 0-second delay, so an errorless teaching procedure. And so we saw in baseline that this participant couldn't answer above about 50% correctly, and so immediately providing that prompt with that 0-second delay, and then gradually increasing the delay to the prompt.
You ready? What number? Number 1.
1.
Number 1.
Number 1.
Number 1. There it is. What number? Number 2.
Number 2.
Number 2. There you go, buddy.
Number
What shape?
1.
Hey, you gotta listen. What shape? Shape circle.
Shape circle.
Shape circle. There we go, Sammy. Fold those hands. What shape? Shape square.
Shape square.
Shape square. There we go, Sam. What number? Number 1.
Number 1.
Number 1. Good, buddy.
So that was the 0-second delay. And these students, and by the way, also, I don't think I mentioned, function at about the level 3 on the VB map. So they had a lot of verbal skills, but couldn't do this skill of answering questions about different visuals.
Look at this one. What number?
Number 1.
So
Should we
here's the post-training probe. So I showed the baseline where he was about 50% correct and said the number every time, independent of the question. I showed the training, or the 0-second part of the training with that immediate prompt. And now here's an example of a post-training probe, and let's see how he does.
Clapping. That's clapping. Good, Sammy. What shape?
Shape square.
And show me folding your hands. It's folding your hands. Look at this one. What shape?
The just by the way, also the teacher therapist here asks for a simple instruction in between each trial for the study, so that she could provide reinforcement, mostly praise, for clapping his hands or touching his nose, and not reinforcement for answering correctly, because we wanted to see if he could do it. If she had reinforced, that reinforcement alone might explain how he acquired the skills, but we wanted to show that it was only the training and the training sessions that resulted in acquiring the skills.
Shape triangle.
Try this one. That's how we tap that shoulder. What number?
Number 3.
Arms up. Good, Sam. Ready? What number?
Number 1.
Clap. Nice clapping. What shape?
Shape square.
Should be knocking.
So they're kind of randomized again. Each trial was different, what shape, what number, and each trial, the card was randomized, and so now he's got to discriminate that question of what shape or what number, discriminate the visual stimulus, looking at the shape and the number, and did that in most cases by using that echoic of what number, number 2, what shape, shape square, was effective for him. And so here's some of the data from the study. We can see that in baseline, in most cases, responding was around that 50%. Sometimes it got a little bit higher, but had these decreasing trends, and it evened out at 50%. So usually saying just the number in that case, or sorry, just the object in this case with object color, and just the number in this case with shape number. And then when we implemented the training, these are again just probes. The training occurred kind of during this line, and we see higher responding over this mastery level of 92%. Correct in some cases, but not in all cases. And so I'll go through some of the things that happened. Just also the squares are the trained ones. And so here, this student did really well with the trained stimuli, and the triangle and circle are those generalization sets. And so we see the different patterns with those. So one thing that happened with just about all of the participants was that they, whereas in baseline, they did not discriminate the question. So they would say either the object every time or the number every time, and not change between the shape and the number based on the question, or the object and the color based on the question. And after training, we saw that a lot of them correctly discriminated the question. So if asked what shape, they would say a shape. If asked what color, they would say a color. But they had tacting errors. And so, for example, when shown a blue hat and asked, what is it? The child would say, it's a chicken. And so kind of saying, doing that correct question discrimination of saying the object, but seeing that hat and thinking it looks like a chicken and saying chicken. So we couldn't give full credit for that because it wasn't the correct tact. But so we kind of depict that by showing these gray bars, is that the dots are the same here, but the gray bars indicate that there was correct question discrimination, but incorrect and correct tacting, right? So with this participant, the gray bars even don't meet the mastery level and are usually at 50%, a couple higher ones. But after training, we have 100% correct question discrimination. So when asked what shape, he gave a shape. When asked what number, he gave a number. But there were some tacting errors, right? Calling a 2 a 3, or a square a circle, or something like that. And similar for here, almost perfect question discrimination compared to the baseline question discrimination. And same with object color for participant 2, 50% in most cases, and then 100% correct question discrimination. But we have those tacting errors, which are these data, which might be something like calling a hat a chicken. Here's the full set of data. And so what you're looking at here is these top 2 are participant 1, the middle 2 are for participant 2, and the bottom is participant 3. And then for each one, the top is the shape number category, the bottom is the object color category. And so we can see that in baseline, we have that nearly consistent around 50% responding for all 3 participants in both categories. And I should point out too that the name of the design here is a multiple probe across categories or across behaviors within a multiple probe across participants. So it's both those designs. And the reason we did that was to be able to have experimental control, but also detect or show any generalization that might have happened, which I'll say in a second. But basically, around that 50% responding, in baseline, and then we see overall higher levels of responding, particularly with the gray bars, and in some cases with the dots, which shows a full correct response. And some of these words up here indicated that we did some additional training to try to get the responding to be even better. So we can see kind of those final post probes for participants 1 and 2, and category 1 for participant 3 showed that the training, that progressive time delay with requiring the echoic, increased question discrimination and increased responding in general, but there were some tacting errors. Come back to the bottom, participant 3 there. Here's participant 2 again, and so we see those patterns. So one of the procedural modifications or additional teaching conditions that we did was mass trial training for shapes. And so participant 2 made some shape errors here, right? Would call a square a circle or a triangle a square. And so we did some mass trial training on shapes only. And we did that with some other participants for some other types of tacting. And I'll show an example of what that mass trial training for shapes looked like.
Those hands. Here we go. What shape? Shape square. Shape square. You are right, my friend. Ready? Look at this one. What shape? Shape triangle. Shape triangle.
So this is a 0-second delay with a whole session of only what shape. And so we want to strengthen what shape, shape circle, what shape, shape triangle, what shape, shape square, to try to get this participant to say the right shape when shown and asked what shape.
Triangle, good. Look at this one. What shape? Shape circle. Shape circle, very nice. Cassius, look at this one. What shape? Shape square. Shape square, awesome.
All right. And so that helped in many cases, that mass trial training to strengthen those individual tact and responses. And then we also did just simply tact training for problems like calling a hat a chicken. And so this is what that looked like.
All right, let's do this. Cup. Cat. Oops.
Flower.
Good. Cup.
Cat.
Good.
Flower.
Awesome.
Spoon.
Very nice.
Hat.
Yeah, EJ.
Car.
And so you could hear the therapist be particularly happy that he said hat when shown the hat and he didn't say chicken. And this type of training is nifty in that she doesn't say, what is it each time, right? Because doesn't want to work on discriminating the question, but just establishes with those first two that I want you to tack. So cup, cat, now you keep going. When I point to it, say flower. And so that allows tact training without the use of what is it, which is a pretty nifty procedure to use.
Good.
Cup.
Cat.
Okay. Here are the data for the cross-category probes. And so the 3 types with the shape, number, color type, which is like this, which is this first whiter bar, and then the shape, color, and the color number with these different bars. And so before training, we see that about 50% correct, only a 1/3% correct with this one because there are 3 questions now. So maybe the participant said the number every time, and so that'd be 1/3 of the questions. And then after training, we see really good 92% correct with this category, a little bit lower with these, and we did some booster training to try to strengthen the individual responses, the trained responses, and still not quite at mastery, but after tact training and improving those tacts, we get 100 or 92% correct with those cross-category probes for participant 1. Here's for participant 2, somewhat similar story. We show the gray bars are the correct question discrimination, but incorrect tacts. and participant 3 did mastery level 92% with that first type of cross-category probe, and not as great with the other ones, but an improvement over baseline. So these combinations that had never been trained were able to answer correctly to a greater extent after the training compared to before the training. And in a way, one way I like to think about this is, well, that history of the training allowed discrimination of, okay, now I'm reinforced only when I discriminate, 2 aspects of the picture based on the question, and also this little strategy I have that when shown this for the first time and asked what color, I can say color blue. And when shown this for the first time, what number? Oh, number 5. And so I have a process I can use as the child to answer the questions more correctly. Participant 3 was interesting in that here's the 2 categories, shape, number, and object color, 50% pretty much across the board with shape, number until training, and then mastery levels by and large, an increase. And then right when we did this training on shape, number, we see an increase in object color before we did the training. So this line depicts training, and so we see mastery levels before training. We did do tact training because of tacting errors, but we didn't do training on, with this participant, of what is it? It's a cat. What color? Color yellow. This participant was correct without the training for this category, and a way to talk about this or think about this is that it seems there was generalization, maybe applied that echoic strategy to the object color category. I had learned that strategy with shape, number, what shape, shape square, what number, number 3. Now I'm again asked, what is it? Oh, it is a cat. What color? Oh, color yellow. Perhaps they applied the strategy. Perhaps there was that history of needing to attend to the question and to the multiple features of the visual stimulus, but they they were correct with this without direct training on this, and that's promising and a good thing, especially in practice, because we can teach that with just a little, with a couple categories or a couple types of stimuli, and then students can be correct with other more complex discriminations with different questions and different pictures, in some cases with one of our 3 participants. So we increased this repertoire of intraverbal tags, answering different questions about different visual stimuli. We attribute this to the progressive time delay and requiring that echoic response. Question is, do we really need that requiring the echoic response? We know that progressive time delay works in lots of studies before. Is that echoic needed? And so we are embarking on a study to compare learning with and without that requiring the echoic response to see if that is actually needed, if we get similar results, or if we get better results when we require the echoic. A couple other findings is we found that object color, the object color category, required roughly twice as many training sessions to mastery compared to shape, number. And this may be because in most early intervention programs, we do a lot of training of object and we do a lot of training of color early on. A little bit later do we get to shapes and numbers. And so the students may have had a longer history of being reinforced for saying the object or saying the color, and shape, number was newer. And so we're able to teach this discrimination more quickly, whereas this had a longer history and some of that prior learning had to be undone. And a recommendation based on that is to start this type of question discrimination training sooner and intersperse these different types of stimuli so that students are getting practice not only responding to a visual stimulus and tacting it, for example, or receptively discriminating it, but when you say, discriminating the questions also, what color, what shape, what is it? One other interesting finding is that would say and argue, and based on some prior writing, that correct pronunciation is required for the echoic, and so if one does not correctly pronounce words, then one is not completely echoing, and so we would want to fix that.
What color?
And so we have this example with this participant who was not pronouncing completely "it is a" or "it's a," and so Taylor worked with him to more clearly pronounce that. So you'll see some examples here of him not pronouncing it correctly, and then her prompting him to pronounce it more correctly.
Color green, very nice. What is it? It's a cat. It's a cat. That is a cat.
So you kind of heard that cat. That was kind of his pattern.
What is it? It's a flower. There you go, bud.
So even when she gave the echoic prompt of "it's a flower," he said "a flower." He didn't fully pronounce "it's a" or "it is a."
Ready? Look at this one. Cassius. What color? Color yellow.
That was incidentally another error pattern we saw with students, was that they would do the correct echo, but the incorrect question discrimination. So she showed the yellow cat and said, "What color?" And he said, "Color cat." And so echoing is correct, but discriminating the question in the picture is not correct. And so some of the extra types of training, the TAC training and the mass trial, were to try to remedy those errors.
Yellow, there we go. What is it? It's a cup.
There it is again. What color, or what is it? Color cup. So there he gets the correct answer, but the incorrect echoic.
Look at this one. What color?
Color green.
Color green. Very nice, Cassius. What is it? It's a cat. It's a cat. There we go.
So now 0-second prompt delay with the correct pronunciation of "it is a."
What color? Color green. Feet on the floor, please. Ready? What is it? It is a cat.
A cat.
Nice job, kiddo. What color? Color brown.
Brown.
Good. That is the color brown. Ready? What color? Color yellow. Color yellow. Fold your hands, please. Ready? Let's look at this one. What is it? It is a cup.
A cup.
There you go. Very nice. What is it? It is a flower.
A flower.
Good, Cassius. There you go, dude. What is it? It is a cup. Ready? What color?
Color yellow.
Color yellow. Amazing. What is it?
A flower.
It is a flower, Cassius. What is it?
A cat.
It is a cat. Very nice. What color?
Color green.
Color green. Perfect. What color?
Color brown.
Very nice, my friend. What is it?
A flower.
Good, buddy. What is it?
A cup.
It is a cup, Cassius.
So there that's at the 1-second delay. So if he was wrong, he would get a prompt, but by and large, that looks like a probe where he's getting them all right and discriminating the "it is a" versus color. So that extra training with pronunciation really helped facilitate correct responses with him. So we can think about, how does this work, or why does this work, this echoing, say what number, number one. And there's a few explanations. And so one, and these different explanations involve, I think, different verbal operants. One, there's the echoic aspect of this that at least increases attending to the key word in the verbal antecedent response. So this is like that differential observing response we saw with the Kaisermore et al. Study. And so what number, saying number, helps me attend to the key word in the antecedent verbal stimulus. There's also intraverbal control between me saying number as the child. If I'm the child, I say number, and that has me evoke a number. So I say number one. There's intraverbal control between number and one, but not between number and cat, for example. And this is similar when we think about this in the autoclitic frame, as Skinner and Palmer and others have talked about, written about, because an autoclitic frame, like the boy runs, where we have that structure to our language and our grammar, there's intraverbal control between those for responses to be reinforced in everyday language. We say the boy runs, not the runs boy. And so there's intraverbal connections between boy and runs, as there is here between number and one, color and blue, and so forth. So say intraverbal control is strengthened when we respond with an autoclitic frame. And a final possible explanation is that there's a little bit of, as Lowenkron defined, joint control. So I see this visual stimulus of the circle and the one, I hear what number, and now I scan this visual stimulus, I see the number aspect, and I see the color feature, or sorry, I see the number feature, and I see the shape feature. And so what number? And I say, number, is that a number? Number, is that a number? Ah, number one. So when the visual stimulus, in a sense, matches the category of number, there's that joint control, and I emit the response of one. I don't go, what number? See the circle? Ah, number circle. That doesn't match. But the product of number and the physical number match, and so I emit that response. And so there's a few ways to think about this, but I think it's a really powerful procedure, one that's not been in the literature or in workbooks or teaching protocols for children with autism and ABA programs previously, and one that's really promising to teach this difficult repertoire. Some further ideas for practice is we could get creative with the types of questions and objects we show, and maybe we have this, what is it and what does it say, and what color and what does it have. We could do things like that. It's kind of endless, and we could combine 4 questions, so we can get creative with the different types of questions and the different visual stimuli. One just thing I'll point out is that we would show a horse, for example, or something like a horse, and do what is it and what color, and those both have physical properties. So you see the horse and you see the brown, but what does it say? You don't see the neigh, and so that's just a different type of skill a little bit, and so you can be wary of those. That might be easier in the sense that we kids a lot of times have a lot more experience with, it's a horse, what does it say? Neigh, and that's more been intraverbally taught. But having the visual stimuli there may be easier in some senses also. The final piece on this section that I want to address is that we see in the VB map and related assessments and curriculum, answering rotating WH questions around a single topic, and it comes out in the VB map where it's shown the sequence of, sometimes there'll be a big visual scene and answering lots of questions. What do you see? A tree, and what does a tree have? Leaves, and we're having this conversation about the picture and answering a lot of these rotating or intraverbally, thematically related questions around a single topic. Ultimately, too, we want to get to doing that without a visual scene, and we're just having a conversation about a single topic, and I'm asking questions, and ultimately the child would be asking questions, and we'd each be answering questions and having a conversation about it. So here's a little example of that, of this student who has high functioning autism, is around 5 years old, is pretty good with this skill, but you can see some room for improvement. And I also this is kind of where we want to get with a lot of our students. And I would also say that we don't have a whole lot of research on this level of multiply controlled interverbals and complex interverbals. And so we would want to keep thinking about the best ways to teach this.
What are we going to talk about today?
Oh, I guess I would sharks.
Okay, tell me about sharks.
Sharks can eat lots of fish, like they love like piranhas because they have shark teeth.
Yeah.
Like
They have shark teeth.
wait a minute. Okay, I did good.
You're doing good. Where do sharks live?
We're in the ocean.
Yep. Who else lives in the ocean?
Whales.
What do whales do? Out of where? That's right. And who else lives in the ocean? What's that?
Fish.
Fish. What's a kind of fish?
A piranha.
Scary. What other things are scary?
Octopus.
Octopuses are scary?
Yeah. And
What's-
jellyfish.
Yeah. What do jellyfish do?
They sting other fish.
Alright, they do.
And so we're having a conversation about the ocean, in a sense. I'm asking a lot of questions and thematically relating one question to the next. And my friend here is pretty good at answering those and discriminating those complex questions. This somewhat relates back to topic number 1, where it's only complex questions. There's got to be verbal conditional discriminations. What's an animal that swims in the water? What other animal stings? And so what other animal is scary? And so needing to come under the control of those multiple verbal stimuli, animal and scary. And he's pretty good at doing that. So that's where we want to get ultimately, or at least a next big step with teaching interverbals to students kind of at the high end of level 3 in the VB-MAP, and we need more research on that. But I think we can use some of these strategies that I've laid out here of thinking of this as verbal conditional discriminations, identifying what are those keywords that are going to evoke responses, possibly using the echoic as we did with topic number 2 in teaching intraverbal tax, as well as in topic 1 with the differential observing response. And so it might be, what animal lives in the ocean? Oh, an animal that lives in the ocean is a shark, right? And so echoing that part to, in a sense, self-prompt the answer, enter into an autoclitic frame where ocean animal evokes shark, could be a promising strategy to use. I didn't indicate I was going to talk about this at the outset, but I decided to tack on another section to this workshop presentation. And this next part is I want to describe this paper by David Palmer from 2016 entitled On Intraverbal Control and the Definition of the Intraverbal. And this then will lead into me talking about problem solving and one final study that I'm working on related to intraverbals and problem solving, multiply controlled intraverbals, from a different perspective than what we've seen so far with verbal conditional discriminations, our multiply controlled interverbal tax, our multiply controlled interverbal, and now delving into another type of multiply controlled interverbal, another major type or category of multiply controlled interverbals. So in this paper, Palmer presents the situation of Dick asks Jane, what's 6 times 4? Jane says 24. He says, way to go. And then Dick says, now name some prime numbers between 70 and 100. And Jane says, what? 71, 73, 77, no, not 77. And she ultimately comes up with the correct response. And so we can think of 24 being an intraverbal, meets the definition of the intraverbal. It's a verbal response in under the control of a verbal antecedent stimulus that does not have point-to-point correspondence. And so it's an intraverbal based on a narrow definition, whereas that second response, the group of prime numbers, is an intraverbal based on the broad definition of an intraverbal. And so I'll define those out here, is that the narrow definition is really Skinner's 1957 definition of an intraverbal, which is a verbal response evoked by a verbal stimulus due to reinforcement history of that verbal response in the presence and not absence of that verbal stimulus. So kind of the response is due to a history of reinforcement in the presence of that antecedent, and this is the definition of stimulus control. So this definition closely aligns with a response under stimulus control, under conditional stimulus control, and so on. Whereas the broad definition of an intraverbal is a verbal response evoked by a current or immediate verbal stimulus and other stimuli due to a reinforcement history with those relevant stimuli. And so we'll see that those other stimuli could be many, and with the prime number example, the other stimuli are working out in Jane's head of, well, let's see, is 70 a prime number? No, is 71 a prime number? Yes, okay, 71. And so generating those stimuli by working through the problem covertly and then bringing them to the overt level. So 71, say, is evoked by the question, what are prime numbers between 70 and 100? And the product of this covert working out the problem or thinking about, does this work, yes or no, and making those additional discriminations covertly. So another important point Palmer makes is that although Skinner's, Jack Michael's, and Mark Sundberg's work, research, seem to evoke this, it is limiting to attempt to classify each verbal response as one verbal operant. And so as I was working in a verbal behavior program early on, this is what we did. And this is what lots of people do, is we identify, we see a verbal response and we say, is it a mand? Is it an intraverbal? Right? My dog barks at the window. Is that a mand? Is that a tact? And we often want to classify verbal responses. And Palmer says, as Skinner also said, but that purity is rare outside of the laboratory and classroom. And so it's almost never the case that a verbal response is one verbal operant. It's almost always multiply controlled. And Palmer says our task is not primarily to classify behavior, this is a mand, this is a tact, this is an intraverbal, but to identify its controlling variables. And so that's where that multiply controlled intraverbal under the broad definition is, what was it that controlled that verbal response of, say, 71 for the example. Less important if it's a intraverbal or a textual response or something like that. Skinner's approach, Palmer's suggestions. So Skinner, 1957, seemed to adopt the narrow definition of the intraverbal because the examples he gave of intraverbal were like, reciting the alphabet or doing those fill-ins like we saw in the early parts of the intraverbal subtest. A, B, child says C. Poems, Mary had a little, child says lamb. And when Skinner wrote, when we say those poems or the alphabet, we are responding intraverbally to our own generated verbal stimuli. Adding with 2 + 2, 4, and small talk. Hi, how are you? Hi, hello, how are you? Fine. Is these kind of more pure control, singular control, somewhat aligned with the notion of a simple discrimination, where one verbal antecedent evokes the verbal response due to a history of reinforcement. And Palmer suggests we retain the narrow definition when talking about intraverbal behavior as a primary verbal operant. So when we talk about a child emits an intraverbal, it should be this narrow definition. When we say he or I emitted intraverbal, that's that more simple, narrow definition. But when there's no clear history of reinforcement, like what's the prime number between 70 and 100, that's when a response is multiply controlled. We can refer to intraverbal control, which is an addition to other sources of control. So 71 was intraverbally controlled by what's a prime number between 70 and 100, but there were other sources of control for saying 71, which may be an echoic of a covert response of say in my head 71, and I echo that to the listener, and so that's important, and points to the notion also that almost all intraverbal under everyday circumstances is multiply controlled. We've seen that in the examples that I've presented here. And we want to analyze intraverbal behavior and verbal behavior in general as such. And so Palmer, wrote about this because it's closely aligned with his deep interest in problem solving as an explanation for how we emit complex verbal behavior, like recall, memory, and what's a prime number between 70 and 100, and I'll show some other examples here in a minute. Is I think he would offer, and I would agree, that problem solving is required for intraverbals that meet the broad definition. In other words, that there's no history of reinforcement. We've got to emit some other behavior to generate the stimuli that evoke the ultimate response, like was the case with 71. And so 2 doctoral students and I published a review of applied studies using Skinner's analysis of problem solving to teach different skills like math skills and social skills and intraverbal skills, spelling skills, and I presented on this a few years back at the National Autism Conference. And I'm gonna follow up on that a little bit with a more recent study. And so here are some, I do this in person if I were with you, but I'll leave you to answer these on your own, but questions for you that you don't have a history of reinforcement for, most likely, and see if you can answer them. So what did you do last weekend? That's a common social question. And it's always novel because it's always a new weekend, unless you're asked many times, what did you do last weekend, say on the same Wednesday. But on any given Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, what did you do last weekend is always new because there's a new weekend that you've experienced. So what did you do last weekend? Yeah, and that's the type of question we'd want to work with a child with autism to answer, and to teach him to do that. Similar, what did you do at school today? How was school today? That sort of thing. Here's the second question for you. What did you eat for dinner this past Tuesday? Giving you a little bit of time to answer that. And let's see, it's actually Tuesday as I'm sitting here recording this for me. But if I had to think of what did I have for dinner last Tuesday, I would have a hard time coming up with it. But if I were to, or if I thought of what did I have for dinner, if I could even remember last night, I start to picture things. I start to picture my kitchen, my wife, my kids, and it looks like I just saw that we've taken out chicken to make something tonight. Well, gee, what did we have last night? So I'm asking myself questions also. Maybe you're doing that. Maybe you've done that in the few seconds I gave you to answer this. And you somewhat work backwards a little bit. And so I'm asking myself questions. I remember my wife talking about meat. And oh yes, actually we had tofu. And it was a different kind of tofu than we normally have. And it was fine. It was pretty good. Tofu stir fry. Was last night, but I'd have to work harder to come up with what I had a week ago. So, but mainly how I got there was by visualizing and asking myself questions and answering those questions. Another question for you is maybe we want to plan a trip. And I say, well, how long will it take to drive from Penn State to Cambridge, Massachusetts? Maybe we want to go visit Skinner's grave in Cambridge at Mount Auburn Cemetery. And so let me ask you, how long will it take to drive from Penn State to Cambridge, Massachusetts? I'm guessing you've never been asked that before. You don't have a history of reinforcement for that, but you can come up with a response. And I'm guessing that you maybe right now are pulling out to challenge yourself, even though you won't get totally positive feedback from me. But if you were, maybe some automatic or self-reinforcement, but you might pull out Google Maps or pull up Google Maps, or just Google, drive Penn State, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and you'll get the answer of whatever it is, 7 hours maybe, and then you could read that off the page and say it to me if I were with you. And the final question, if we're planning this trip, is what will the weather be next weekend in Cambridge, Massachusetts? I should be more, next weekend, next Saturday, whatever, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I'm more sure you've never been asked that because, again, it's a new weekend coming up that you've never experienced before. But you could answer this question. And that would be a response with intraverbal control, but with other control from likely the picture or number in your weather app that you can look at quickly and type in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and look at next weekend and see what the weather will be, the temperature, and the sunny or cloudy or rainy. So at first, when I first asked each of these, especially the last three, they were problems in the sense that you most likely could not come up with an immediate answer like you could for what's your name or what's 2 + 2 or what's, as in Palmer's example, 6 × 4. You come up with an immediate answer, 24, because you've had a history of reinforcement for that answer to that question. But these, you do not have a history of reinforcement for answering these questions, but you can engage in additional behavior called problem solving or precurrent behavior, which generates the stimuli that can then evoke the response. And so those responses of 7 hours, for example, are multiply controlled by the question, how long will it take to drive from Penn State to Cambridge, Mass? And the number on your screen after you type in directions from Penn State to Cambridge, Mass. So that's where the multiple control is. And I talked about this in my last Penn State National Autism Conference. One study I did on this with teaching children with autism to recall past events, which the analysis would be something like this. Tell me about your day, which is a skill that we want lots of children with autism, individuals with autism, to answer, and we often don't get much. But ultimately, or if we think about what do we do? Maybe if we were to give an elaborate response, or what does a typical child maybe do? Is maybe tell me about your day. Maybe they think about and picture, oh, there's a slide, there's a painting of a tree, and maybe they ask questions. What did I do? I painted a tree. Who did I play with? Sarah. And that's kind of some covert visual imagining and self-questioning and answering. And those stimuli generated by that covert behavior evoke, I painted a tree and I played on the slide with Sarah. And so students and I conducted a study evaluating that procedure of visual imagining and self-questioning to teach children with autism to recall past events. And we can think of that response is intraverbal in the sense that verbal antecedent and verbal response with no point-to-point correspondence, but it's not an intraverbal in that narrow definition. It's there's intraverbal control in the broad definition, as well as control by these visually imagined images and the answers to my self-questions. And so all of those stimuli converge on the verbal response. So there's the multiple control. So a more recent study that I and one of my doctoral students, Sarah Frampton, have conducted is using problem solving to teach those questions like how far is it from from Penn State to Cambridge, Massachusetts, or what's the weather, and taught them to do likely what you just did or what you could do of using an app to answer those questions. So we targeted these 3 questions, and these are all related to maybe a social skill of planning a trip or a geography lesson or digital literacy with using apps and computers and devices. And so what's the distance to X city? What time is it in X city using the clock app? And what is the temperature in X city? And so every time we asked, we put in a different city because otherwise there would be a history of reinforcement, but it was always a novel question. That was a problem that needed to engage in that problem-solving behavior to generate the answer. There's a number of studies and papers on using iPods, iPads, technology with children with autism to improve skills, but they haven't been used in this sense to answer questions or to problem solve. And so I'm going to share, we had 2 adolescents with autism, Joey and Phoebe, both 17 years old, had verbal skills, they could converse, and they were already working on completing academic work and reading and writing and spelling, and they already use computers and tablets daily in their curriculum in their classroom and for leisure. And so this is an example, we did this mostly with writing, and so an example of a worksheet with 15 questions with randomly, again, interspersed, what time is it, what's the temperature, what's the distance, and then we also interspersed easy or known questions that we could use to reinforce responses and to somewhat intersperse easy and difficult, and to show that problem solving wasn't needed for what's your last name or what's your favorite food, or not the same kind of problem solving at least. And so the cities never repeated, meaning it was always a problem. And whenever we gave the worksheet, even in a probe or assessment, we said, you can use this if you want to with the iPad next to the student. So there were several pre-training steps, which was ensuring that the students could tact or emit a textual response to the digital stimuli in the, like the time and the distance. So if I put in Penn State to Cambridge and it showed 7 hours and 26 minutes, that the student could read or say that time, 7 hours and 26 minutes, that they could see that 7 hours and 26 minutes and copy it, write it, that they could go into one of the apps and find Chicago. So from a, find Chicago either by typing it in or selecting it from a drop-down list. Listener training in the sense of find the map app amongst that array of apps on the iPad, and the known questions, what's your last name, and those sorts of things. So training step 1 was, we're in the app and we're teaching how to use the app. And so it's use the clock app. We're going to use the city of Milan. And so they type in Milan or find Milan and hit enter, and they get what time it is in Milan. And then we taught a rule for when to use the app. So for example, we taught them to say, if the question is about time, use the clock app. And so this was going to allow them to discriminate which app for which type of problem or question. And we want to evaluate a little bit is knowing how and when enough to learn the skill. So how to use the app and when to use the app. And we saw with Joey, here his data with percentage of independent correct responses and different probe sessions. So this is all probes again, not during teaching, that he didn't answer any temperature, time, or distance questions in baseline. And after that first set of training, he also didn't answer when we taught him to use the app and to say a rule that still didn't evoke correct responding. We did a vocal probe also, so the closed circles are those written probes, and we also did a vocal probe where we just asked what's the temperature in Milan, for example. And he didn't get those. And so treatment 2 is then, and this was inspired a bit from Neef and colleagues and their study on teaching, using problem solving to teach students with disabilities to answer math word problems, is what's the problem about? And we taught them to underline that keyword of time in this example, and then to say the rule after underlining. So underline this question's about time, and then say if the question about time, use the clock app. And that training was enough to generate correct responses for Joey with temperature, which we trained first. And then what we saw was now he's got it in a sense, right? Or he showed generalization from, what's the temperature in Milan? I underline temperature, I say my rule, if temperature, use the weather app, I put in Milan, I find the temperature, I write it down. Now, I get it. Time, what time is it in Cairo? I do the same process, but say my rule of if time, use the clock app, punch it in the clock app, and so forth, and same with distance. So he got it after teaching with just temperature. He applied the problem solving to time and distance, which is really promising for him, because we can teach that one problem solving skill of using an app, and he can now apply it and generalize it to other apps and other types of questions. Our other participant, Daphne, it did not go as smoothly for her. She needed a lot more training and interventions, and a couple of her errors or challenges were she would say the rule of if distance, use the map app, and then she would write use the map app next to what's the distance to California, San Francisco. And so that was incorrect. And she would default to one app. So we eventually, after a lot of training, got her to have acquisition and correct responses with time or temperature, the first one. And then when we taught time, she would use the time app only, even when she saw temperature questions. So here's a video that Sarah put together that shows Joey and Daphne, and a little bit of baseline, a little bit of teaching, and a little bit of post-training probes. And you can see some of the errors with Daphne.
And you can use this if you want to.
No. What? This has to grab it. What? Tap it in.
And you can use this if you want.
I'm not using that.
All right, you ready, Sadie? All right, use the clock app. Awesome job. Oh my gosh. All right, say a rule about time.
Time. 5 o'clock app.
You are excellent. Let's do it again. Say a rule about time.
Time. 5 time, find, clock app.
So excellent.
Ready?
Yes.
What's this problem about? Underline it.
Underline.
Great. What's this problem about? Underline it.
Underline.
What's this problem about?
The question's like what temperature, find the weather app.
Magic just happened.
Remember, you gotta use these while you're at work.
The question's like what temperature, find the weather app.
Taught them, we never prompt faded the answer. We only prompt faded.
Time to do your worksheet. You can use this if you want to.
Okay.
I like when you say that. You can use it if you want to. Sounds funny when you say that. I don't know why.
Here's a cover. It's 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 a cover.
It's time to do the worksheet. You can use this if you want to.
No, thank you. I'm good.
So you're fluently navigating the clock app and the distance app or the travel app, map app. And so we saw with Daphne a lot more rote responding, stereotypic behavior. And so it was this additional training and discrimination training that we needed for her. And so one of the additional treatments or treatment components we had for Daphne was after underline and we'll point to the app because she was saying if the question about time, use the clock app, it's still not going to the correct app. So we used a gestural prompt to point to the clock app and teach to use the app after saying the rule, had to say write it. So really had to get down to each behavior step along the way and prompt fade with that with Daphne to get her to answer the questions correctly. And so we can see here with her graph that treatment 1, we started with distance, and so treatment 1, no correct responding. Treatment 2, refreshing some of that. Treatment 3, still no correct responding. Once we had the prompting within the probe, so the point in the correct app, then she got it with the distance, and then similar sequence with temperature. And once she started to get correct answers with temperature, she declined with distance because now she had to also discriminate between what's the temperature and what's the distance. And so here we did combined training, 2 or 3 together, and that's a good teaching in general is, doing these one at a time is a little more like mass trial training where don't have to engage in the full discriminations, but with training with multiple types of questions, then you prompt fade and reinforce that discrimination of when temperature, use the weather app, when distance, use the map app, and then there was correct responding in the regular post-training probes without the prompting for both distance and temperature, similar sequence with time, and we finally got a probe with 100% with all 3 types of questions at the end there. She did not show generalization to vocal responses, only the written responses. So in conclusion with this study, We can teach students to use technology such as apps to solve problems related to planning a trip or geography, also related to digital literacy skills. These are multiply controlled intraverbals. We saw that students need different levels of instruction. Joey had quick learning and generalization. Daphne showed more rigid learning patterns and needed more training and different strategies. And we could think about how we could expand this to bus schedules, movies, restaurants, especially when coronavirus is over and we can go out and about again. Sports, right? What time is the Celtics game on, and news and so forth. And I think we want to do more with this vocally without writing to get it to be more of a social skill and not more of an academic skill. But I think both are important, academic skill and social skill for this type of repertoire. So my broad conclusions for this workshop are: we should study multiple control. We should arrange our teaching for multiple control. Again, early on, kids need that more singular control, more simple intraverbals, but as soon as we got a repertoire of that, we want to shift to teaching multiply controlled intraverbals. And we looked at the verbal conditional discriminations, where a student has to attend to multiple verbal stimuli, in the antecedent interverbal tax, where a student has to attend and respond to the verbal stimulus and the nonverbal stimulus and different features of each. We saw DOR with helping to attend to the antecedent verbal stimuli, requiring the echoic, help facilitate multiply controlled verbal behavior. I think that self-prompting, what color? Color blue, is really powerful. And finally, we saw problem solving can help answer multiply controlled intraverbals or help emit multiply controlled intraverbals. So I hope this workshop has given you a sense of different ways of assessing and teaching multiply controlled intraverbals. I encourage you to work on this in your practice, and if you're doing research, help conduct more research in this area. And I thank you for listening to this, and I want to thank the National Autism Conference, Mike Miklas and Amiris DePuglia, for inviting me to give this presentation. And I miss seeing you in person and hope to see you another time at the Penn State National Autism Conference.